So I think it's appropriate that we're having this conversation today. Karina swears she didn't plan it on the 4th, but it does feel like a really sweet way to celebrate America, to have a conversation about how we can be engaged for the well-being of all people. And the story that we want to share with you today is really a story of unlikely allies. Heidi and I really came into this process in very different ways, came into the process of political engagement in very different ways, but we think it's really representative of how people are locating themselves in the movement and orienting to how to show up in social issues or in politics. And what we hope by sharing the story with you guys is that it touches something inside of you that is yearning to act. I think we're all feeling that calling that we want to act and we want to engage, but sometimes we don't know how to, and that's exactly what we experienced, was a deep yearning to act and have sort of found our way to this place. And it's certainly what we know the world needs right now is for all communities, but particularly this community, to show up and to engage. So that's sort of our offering to you today.
So it is the 4th of July, my friends, and the country was founded 238 years ago. And look at what we've created. Let's talk a little bit about the state of democracy. Winston Churchill said democracy was the worst form of government ever to have been created, except for all the others that have been tried. So today, we have to remember that democracy actually was founded in the 6th century BC by wealthy male landowners with the express purpose of alienating women, slaves, and people who did not own property. In many ways, 8,000 years ago from then, it hasn't changed that much. And I want you to think a little bit about what we're dealing with regard to democracy. In November of 2013, Congress had a 9% approval rating. That's the lowest approval rating it's ever had since the approval rating has been measured. These are some things that have a higher approval rating than Congress. Paris Hilton, communism.
Britney Spears.
Yes, Britney Spears, Richard Nixon during Watergate, the airline industry, and toe fungus. This is totally true. It's like Pew Research, Gallup Research, all of that. Totally true. So again, let's think about also the makeup of Congress. Get this one. If you are an elected member of Congress, you have a 90% chance of being reelected. 90%. 90% incumbency reelection rate. I swear, if you get elected to Congress, it's like the only thing that death and taxes are the things that are the most predictable, but getting reelected to Congress. So that's actually on us, you know? And for years, I've been called to work inside this system of government, working for 25 years in politics and presidential campaigns and local and state campaigns. And what I came to is looking for the foundational change inside of the system. There's a lot of people that work outside the system, social movements, petitions, internet sites that try to change how we interact and how we vote, but those clearly aren't working. So for me, I was thinking, okay, what are the things that we can do to change it from the inside? And I came up with the idea of elevating women to positions of leadership. That if we get more women elected to office, then perhaps we can get some different policy decisions that are more helpful. I mean, all of the empirical research across the board, from psychology to leadership to business, say that if you have diverse perspectives around decision-making bodies, that you'll get better outcomes, that your companies will make more money, that you actually probably will pass policies and legislation and make decisions that are more aligned with the well-being for all. Which led me to this fateful day. In 2012, I was in Ohio, in a parking lot outside of a church in Cleveland, sitting in my mother's PT Cruiser, having spent 4 months working on the Obama campaign, because if you're working on a Democratic presidential campaign, you have to drive American-made cars. And this cruiser did not have any shocks, so I'd literally been going around the entire state of Ohio like this. My body was really hurting. I was living in different random people's empty houses, the empty rooms of their children for the last 5 months. I ate mostly at Starbucks. And I was devoted to try to engage more women in Ohio to get out and vote. So I think I'd been in an event where we were handwriting postcards for all of the women in Ohio to see if they'd actually step up and engage. So I'm like sitting in this little PT Cruiser, and I'm tired and my body hurts, and I'm like probably like 10 pounds heavier, feeling crappy, and my phone rings, and it's Kerri Kelly.
And I was at the time running a campaign called Yoga Votes, which was dedicated to organizing the well-being community around the 2012 election. And whenever I would call people like Heidi, or people outside of the yoga community, like Planned Parenthood or the Women's Donor Network, or people from the Obama campaign, I would get really nervous that they wouldn't get it, because it seemed really, well, it was unproven that there was a relationship between spiritual activism and politics. It seemed far-fetched, arguably silly.
Yeah, I totally 100% thought it was silly.
Arguably silly. And yet deep down in my guts, I knew that there was something to this, that there was something to this way in which we could engage from the inside, that the revolution had to start within, and that it could be really powerful. And never in my wildest imagination would I imagine that I would be running a political engagement campaign. I spent most of my life on a totally different path, in a white suburban town outside of New York, on very much like that predetermined, predictable path of overachiever. I was encouraged to get good grades, to be kick-ass in the world, to climb the corporate ladder, to take people out, to do whatever it was necessary to be self-sufficient and successful. And
you did it.
And I did it, and I was good at it. And that was what our culture also acknowledged, right? Our culture really like rewards success in that way. That's what it looks like. And so I bought into that on every level. And I think also like I really grew up thinking that I was really ordinary, and that I couldn't make an impact on the world, like a big impact. So I was like, yeah, this is my path. Cool, let's go. Until the world impacted me. And on 9/11, as Karina mentioned, I lost my stepdad, who did the most extraordinary thing in running up 77 flights of stairs and saving countless lives. And certainly passing in Tower 2 when that collapsed. But obviously in that moment for me, everything changed. Everything that I had known and learned to be normal, to be safe, that like perfectly curated life that I had designed for myself, that was like insulated and self-sufficient, was like blown to pieces. And I found myself not knowing what to do, right? And at the time, accidentally, yoga was in my life, and was the very thing that that not just helped me heal from my grief, but helped me navigate this like insane, unimaginable, if you know, event that went on and on and on and on. I mean, at first we were like, you know, searching for survivors, and then searching for bodies, and then searching for terrorists. I mean, it was just like we talk about insanity, like it was insanity. And yoga really helped me orient in amongst all of that like messiness and chaos. But this other thing happened for me in my practice, which was I started to get really clear about who I was, who I really was, not who I thought I should be, and what I was meant to do. And I realized that if the world could impact me at this level, then I could actually be an impact on the world. And so I packed up, moved across the country, became a yoga teacher, and started to lean into the work of yoga and how yoga had transformed my life and pointed me in a direction of healing and service and what was possible for other people. And that's when I joined up with Sean Cornan, Off the Mat into the World. And we were really interested in what does it look like to translate all that we do on the mat, the values that we practice, the skills that we cultivate, the commitments that we make into action. And not just like action, but into action, like into service, into social engagement, into social justice. And what we started to see were that people who were practicing yogis, and I'm sure I am preaching to the choir here, but I'm sure many of you were called to this for this reason, were waking up, feeling on purpose, wanting to engage. Yoga wasn't just informing who they were, but it was informing how they related to their family, how they parented their kids, how they consumed goods, what they ate, the cars that they drove, how they traveled. It started to inform the ways in which we engaged socially, and the issues that we cared about. And we realized that this maybe could actually tip over into politics. And that's when we knew we were onto something really powerful. And so that brings me to the phone call with Heidi. And I had called her and said, I'm doing this thing. And honestly, on the other side of the line, like there was dead silence. And I was like, oh no, this is another one of those conversations. And I said, I really need your help because I need to figure out a way to bridge these two worlds. And I waited and it was like static. And then after like this like dramatic pause.
Then I said, I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm in. I'm in. What can I do to help?
Yeah.
Because you see, I grew up in a tiny town in Nebraska, very different than Kerri, actually. All of the men in my life were elected officials, yet all the women in my life were the ones that were setting the policy that they were actually doing. And these women in my life, my mother, my grandmother, they had these big brains and big dreams, and they were stuck for whatever reason. Social choices, reproductive choices in many ways. And I was committed to not being stuck and to not let my dreams not manifest. And so I have been obsessive about service to the world. I threw myself into maximum service. I bought a one-way ticket from Nebraska to Washington, D.C. to change the world. I worked for my U.S. Senator. I worked on the Telecom Act of '96. When I moved to San Francisco, I built the San Francisco 311 Customer Service Center. We did a major resilient city project. I was organizing women in politics as the president of the San Francisco Women's Political Committee. We tried to gender balance the Board of Supervisors. I was all in. And then most recently, with my classmates at Harvard, we're building this social platform for politics, democracy.com, like big, big, big. But the reality of my life was, on a personal level, it was destroying me. My well-being was shot. It manifested in alcohol abuse, drug addiction, issues with food, issues with relationships, horrible relationship with money, countless trips to psychiatrists, depressions, what's wrong with me, that I was giving everything into service and change and not being mindful of me. And about 10 years ago, as I was pursuing, a spiritual path of recovery, I started doing yoga, meditation, and having that like little inner seeker happen, where I was starting to heal. I was very much living two lives. The political Heidi, the big projects that I was working on, yet there was this life that was happening underneath, where I was healing and growing and cultivating my own well-being. And so when that phone call happened with Kerri Kelly, it was as if my two worlds had suddenly come together. And it was a really, really magical moment.
And I think we really needed each other, right? Because I knew nothing of politics. I was, an accidental, I call it, an accidental politician, an accidental organizer. And Heidi was really committed to her own well-being. And so that was the first of many conversations. And then over the next 2 years, we continued that conversation with other unlikely allies, like a congressman from Ohio, like a founding father of the Occupy movement, like a sensei social justice activist, like one of the co-founders of Wanderlust. And we, as these unlikely people, would rally around a table and talk about what could it look like to bridge these two worlds? What could it look like for us to organize and come together around a social and political platform of well-being, and that is the very thing that got us here today.
I realized it wasn't silly anymore.
And she realized it wasn't silly anymore, and I realized I had a lot to learn politically. But it also is sort of what came to be what we're calling CTZNWELL, which is sort of this new call to action, if not movement, for all of the leaders and participants and individuals who are in this, are participating in this lifestyle of health and relationship and sustainability, who are committed to their own well-being and to the well-being of all people. How can we organize and harness our power so that we can be a political force? And I want to say a quick thing about well-being, because I think, like many things in our culture, that term too has been appropriated and might mean different things to different people. And so we're really wanting to engage the community in what that means. But I think we're thinking about well-being in the way in which Gandhi defined it, which was around universal well-being, well-being that's inclusive of basic human rights, well-being that is deeply interconnected, which means there can't just be a well-being of one or a well-being of the privileged. Like, the only way to well-being is to advocate for the well-being of all people. And that very much has to inform the way in which we show up and engage, the issues that we support, the values that we operate from. And so that's very much the thing that we're, I want to say, really curious about as we enter this movement, which is what does well-being mean to us, and what does well-being mean to America? Like, what does well-being mean to our country if we are, in fact, going to embody and live our practice and be a stand for one another, which I think is what we're here to do. And that sort of brings us to some of the core principles of CTZNWELL.
So here we are presenting to you this concept of CTZNWELL, which we believe have 4 basic principles. One is the fact that we have to act from values. 2, we definitely have a crisis of engagement. 3, we have to start looking at the well-being for we, not just the well-being for me. And 4, let's talk about reclaiming power, right? So first of all, let's talk about acting from values. There have been no social movements in the history of the world that have not been generated from values. The civil rights movement, women's suffrage, even the Christian right. And I will digress for a moment. I was sitting in the headquarters of the Republican National Committee 3 weeks ago, pitching democracy.com about engagement at the lowest levels of government, bringing unheard voices into the mix, getting different people elected. And let me tell you, they're yearning for something different too. But let's talk about values, right? I realized, or I thought, that getting women elected to office was an inherent foundational issue. But I realized that's the point. It's an issue, not a value. So when we started talking about those deep values, I realized that was the most foundational at all. That moving people into action was really important to start talking about these irrefutable, dare I say, inalienable, but undeniable values of humanity. So some of the values that we have identified for CTZNWELL are things like inherent dignity, mutual responsibility, fundamental belonging. Like, we all belong here. Basic goodness, which we study in Buddhist practice. Compassionate action. We have to move, take action, be of service in an active way. Sufficiency, which is I have enough, I am enough. One of my favorites. And of course, wild agency. Yes, wild agency. Like taking action in creative ways. So these are the values that can motivate us and motivate the concept of CTZNWELL in a way that I have not yet been inspired, and something that I am very excited about acting toward, which goes to the idea of the crisis of engagement. Okay, so my friends, let's talk about voting, shall we? We have a problem in America with regard to voting. Now, there's been recent research out, I think it's a social scientist by the name of Ilya Somin, who just recently released a paper in a book called Democracy and Political Ignorance. And it talks about the fact that we are all making rational choices about the value of our time and the impact of our vote. So it's not that we're not acting because we're bad citizens. We're acting because we're actually being really mindful of our resource, which is time, which is not good. I mean, if you think about it, in off-year elections, only 24% of registered voters vote, which leads us back to the insanity that I opened with, is like we reap what we sow. So engagement becomes incredibly, incredibly important. And we, through this action of CTZNWELL, hope to provide opportunities for engagement that feel a little bit more empowered, enlightened, and move us into action in a way that, that simply saying, you must vote, well, you must, if you can. You must. there are other ways to be of service as well.
And I'll just riff on that for a moment. I think one of the things that we heard, a lot of you were involved in yoga votes 2 years ago, from this community in particular, was this aversion to voting because the system was broken. And this sort of belief that we had that our vote doesn't count. And often when we would unpack that with people that we spoke about, one of the things, and this has resonated with me to this moment and has informed some of our values, the thing that we heard underneath that was that I don't count, like that there was this experience of self-worth that people were suffering from that was informing the way in which they engaged. Like, I don't think I can make a difference.
That's right.
I don't think
that's what the research shows.
That's right. And so they like, people are making choices with their time and their money and their actions differently. But in fact, the way in which we're not participating is very much participation, like very much participation.
And we get the Congress we elect.
And so what we would talk about at Yoga Votes all the time is that, like, as yogis, yoga is action inherently, and it's not discerning action. It's not like I want to only act where it's like bright and fluffy and fixable. Like, yoga is like lean into the shadow and act and participate and be curious and get informed about the ways in which things are broken and maybe uncertain. Where we don't know the answer, but we still have to lean in anyway. And so that piece feels really core to us. And just the other thing that I'll say about that really quickly is that we don't bring forth the intention or the agenda that you should engage in a certain way. Like that you should vote this way or elect this person, or that this is the agenda we need to kind of put forth, but rather like just frickin' engage. Like, first and foremost, just act, get informed, pay attention, engage, vote.
Go to a school board meeting.
Go to a school board meeting. And then I would even go as far as to say, and then if we can actually start to engage through the lens of our values, the combination of those two principles, I believe that we will always fall on the right side of justice. And by the right side of justice, I mean we will be a stand for the well-being of all people, because that's just what our values call for. And so I want to talk a little bit about the well-being of all people really quickly, because
well-being of we and the well-being of me.
Yeah, because I think there is this kind of thing happening in our community right now where there's a trend or a way in which we're making it okay to only focus on the well-being of me. I've heard this term mindful. Let's be really mindful of my own practice and my own well-being and my own potential. And how do I take responsibility for myself and for my actions and for my choices, and really just show up in a really positive, valuable way. And I think that's really important. But that is not the end of it. Right? Because there's a way in which I think for some of us in this community, it ends there, right? Like, we think that it's enough to do our yoga practice or to meditate every day or to shop at Whole Foods or to drive our Prius or to give back to charities. And there's a way in which that's enabling us to actually divorce ourselves from what's really going on around us and from the injustice around us, and to just focus, to have it be enough to focus on a well-being of me. And I think what we're advocating for is that is in fact not possible, and it's not true, right? Because well-being can only happen if we really start to open up to what's real and true, and playing out all around us, even if it's not our experience, especially if it's not our experience. There's this great book called The Invisible Backpack. Is that what it's called? That talks about privilege and how privilege is invisible. For those of us that are privileged, I am privileged. And how it's hard for us to understand the experience of other people that might not be having the same experience as us. And that what that does is that it enables us to just kind of stay in our lane. Like, we get to stay in our lane and make it as positive and as transformational as we can, but it actually reinforces separation, right? Because then we just keep kind of like pushing ourselves in one direction and letting other people kind of fend for themselves. And so, one of the core principles of CTZNWELL is like, how do we take responsibility for our privilege and start to pay attention to what is invisible in our perspective and in the ways in which we engage, so that we can get more aware and more connected and interconnected to the experiences of other people. And what I also want to say that we think about all the time is that, like, the yoga community looks a certain way right now, but what yoga is becoming as we increase access, and we should increase access. Like, this is a tool that should be available to all people, irregardless of socioeconomic condition, available outside of the studio. It should look and sound like things that people can relate to. I mean, this is a tool that is free. This is an inner tool. Like, everybody should have access to this. And so we can make that possible. And the more that we advocate for the access of these inner tools, the more that what yoga looks like as a community is going to evolve. We're going to look really different, and that's a really good thing.
And there's incredible power there.
And there's incredible power there. And that leads me to kind of this last principle, which is around power. And, one of the things that I've been studying recently is Vivekananda, who brought yoga over to America in 1893 when he joined the Parliament of Religions in Chicago at the Chicago World Fair. And the way in which he talked about yoga was very different than the way in which we talk about yoga. He talked about it in a very political way. He came in and he talked very lovingly and adamantly about how colonialism was playing out in India and the impact of oppression and of the religious agenda to kind of convert people in other countries into their religion, and he made big waves. Like, in a big way. But it wasn't like soft stepping, and it wasn't apolitical. I mean, it was very deliberate, and it was very engaged, and he really called people to wake up and to take responsibility for the ways in which we were impacting other people. And so yoga in politics is not a new thing. This is not a new thing. Actually, like, I think we can argue that, like, it entered America as a political catalyst.
But
and
one of the
yet,
things that I was talking about with Kerri earlier was, as a person that's been in politics for so long, I don't see a lot of yoga there.
Yeah.
I see religious impact for sure. I also see that the president was a little cagey about meeting with the Dalai Lama because of his relationship to China. So I haven't seen our principles that we're talking about in this community here
show up in politics, or even
in an effective, powerful way.
In an effective and powerful way, and even show up in the way in which we show up.
Right.
Because even we as a community are still fairly disengaged. And just to speak about the we for a moment, because this is where power comes in. We are. I say this with a grain of salt because there's a lot of limited research, market research about this community, because we're very much emerging. But there are an estimate of 40 million people in the United States that are engaged in lifestyles of healthy sustainability. 40 million people. 40 million people. That are not just practicing, but are spending their money, which is powerful behavioral action. Spending their money in the way of $118 billion. This is a $118 billion industry on things like personal wellness, on things like healthy food, nutritional supplements, eco lifestyle, green cars, eco-tourism. So we've got a lot of people and a lot of money, and we've got a shared system of values. Right, that we're all here practicing on our mats, and that many of us, I believe, play out in our lives without maybe even knowing it, and that are informing decisions that we make every day without even maybe being conscious of it, and that might even be already informing our social and political stance.
But I will suggest that most of us here who came to this Wanderlust Festival spent more time researching the teachers and the classes that we were going to take, probably 500 times more time than we do about who we vote for or what's going on in our communities.
So there is this incredible, I would say, necessity and opportunity for us to get organized. And this is when, coming out of Yoga Votes, I got really clear. I was like, wow, there's a lot about this that I want to do differently, but one thing I'm really clear about is that we are a powerful community of people. We are a powerful, on every level. We just haven't been organized yet. We have this community, our voice, our dollars, our votes, our embodiment just hasn't yet been galvanized in the direction of the well-being of all, in one direction. And so this, I think, is the opportunity and the invitation for all of us, is like, how can we come together around one system of values, around one shared story of us, around one call to action, or maybe 10 call to actions, so that we can start to channel all that we're feeling here at Wanderlust, all that is percolating and emerging and bubbling up inside of us and around us. I know in my class this morning we had this moment of like collective practice that was like, whoa, like we are not alone. And when we act together, it's amplified. Our intentions are amplified. Our personal transformation is amplified. We receive more when we show up in community. And so that, I think, is the thing that we want to really seed here with you guys today, and just here in general with the work of CTZNWELL, and with whatever is coming out of you. Like I say, one of the things we love about Wild Agency is that, like, this work should be purposeful. Like, I hope that you all have some small or enormous discovery this weekend about who you are and what you stand for, about your purpose, about why you're on this planet, about what you're being called to. And then I hope you go out and do it, because that is huge. Yeah. That is Wild Agency. And if we all show up on purpose, and we all plug into kind of this bigger, higher intention of, as a collective, we are a stand for the well-being of all people, then I think something big is going to happen. Like, I genuinely believe that.
So on this 4th of July, we throw to you the idea of, can you commit to act in common purpose? Can you commit to act for the well-being for all, based on shared values in a way that feels right to you? Because here's the thing. We may perceive that these systems cannot be changed, but I know for a fact, because I've seen it, it can. It truly can. So we're going to open up the conversation right now to see if we can have a conversation, or can see if we can explore some options for service and ideas for how you might engage in action, and to get your feedback on what you might like CTZNWELL to look like, or how you might like to participate. And then we'll close at the end with a little more. So for now, thank you for listening to our exploration, our story, and our journey. And now we turn it back to you. Experiment, for sure.
Calls it experiment.
Experiment.
I'm like, okay, yeah, that.
And now we turn it back to you for an open conversation about what you've heard, what might have been inspired in your thinking, and please help us as we go on this journey together of shared values.